Hello and welcome to the Urbanism Awards Revisited with a focus on 3 of our Great Street finalists. Before we begin, a reminder that we're recording this session for the Academy of Urbanism's YouTube channel. Please engage with the session, ask questions, make comments on the presentations you see by using the chat box. We picked up by our session chair as we go through with a Q&A towards the end of the session. A quick plug for next week's session where we focus on 3 of our Great Place finalists. We'll be hearing from the Viking Triangle in Waterford, City Park in Bradford, the Peace and Winter Gardens in Sheffield. Booking for that session is now open. A thank you to the Academy's sponsors and supporters throughout the year in sessions just like these. And an invitation to you all, if you're not a member of the Academy, please visit our website and consider joining us. A big thank you to the session sponsor this week, which is Savills, who have supported the Academy's Great Street Awards for a number of years now. So thank you very much to them and their support. It's time to hand over to our chair for today, Alistair Barr. Alistair is the Director of the Academy of Urbanism and he is Chair of Barr Gazetas. Alistair, over to you.
Great, thanks very much. Thank you, Stephen, and welcome everyone. This will be my 5th year of being the lead assessor for the Great Streets. And I think there's something really interesting about what happens in the Great Streets. I think all the awards are very diverse. It's a great thing. And I think it's a strength of the Academy of Urbanism that we talk about things, every sector, every discipline, and every scale. And I've long thought that of all the awards, the Great Streets are the most mixed up. And I think this revisiting process has shown that. It's been great to look over all the different things, and what we have for you today is very, very diverse. Each street is very different, which is why I'm going to encourage you to ask as many questions as possible. So before we hand over to the various streets, I'm just going to pass over to Andy Dowding of Savills. He's Director of Urban Design Studio at Savills. He was also a Deputy Assessor, and he just has a few words to say.
Thank you, Alistair. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's event. Before I just say a few words, I'll keep it brief. I'd just like to say thanks to Alistair and Katie Neves of Neves Urbanism and the Academy of Urbanism for organising today's event and as part of the sequence of events that are taking place at the moment. I'd also like to thank our guests from Glasgow, Cork and Poynton who put a lot of work into today. And I want to say I'm looking forward to today's event very much. Savills are very proud to once again sponsor the event, and it's very relevant to us, firstly. We're the only UK consultancy offering property advice and end-to-end services across the whole development life cycle. And across our 300+ services, whether it be development viability, land agency, funding, heritage, planning or urban design, we're fully engaged with the process, and today is very relevant. Our planning team is the largest in the UK with over 200 individuals, and our urban design studio, which operates across 4 studios nationally, works on behalf of major house builders, government departments, institutions, developers, house builders. So we're very engaged in the process and very aware of what's happening across the country and across the UK. And therefore well placed to understand the complexities and to assist the process of delivering exemplar projects like what we're going to be discussing today. As Alistair noted, we've sponsored the event for the last 5 or 6 years, and the annual awards really for us are an important opportunity to see some of the key projects and showcases that are displayed and presented from across the world, and of course to meet some of the inspiring individuals who made these projects happen and to be realised. Savills also understand the value of place and how good design and placemaking can deliver social value and ultimately achieve commercial value to landowners and clients. And I think, in summary, with the localism and sustainability agenda gaining momentum, the impacts of COVID-19 and local communities, the Building Beautiful agenda and the planning white paper, our industry remains pivotal in shaping our built environment and delivering change. So as such, I'm very excited to hear about how today's great streets have succeeded, the challenges that they've overcome, and how they're adapting to these challenging times that we're all facing and all taking part starting now. So thank you once again. I look forward to today, and I'm going to pass back to Alistair.
Great, thank you, Andy. So this is the fourth time that we've done this revisiting, and a sort of tradition has built up that the three different places go in alphabetical order. But this time it's actually working brilliantly. Whether it's a coincidence or intervention, I don't know. But it's almost like we're going to be zooming in on the different parts of urban design, the different parts of what makes a great street. So we're beginning with a very long street in Glasgow. So the person presenting is Dr. Emma Morton. She's a senior design officer in city design in Glasgow, and I think one of the fascinating things is she's the creator of their urban design framework. So I'm handing over to you, Emma, and keep the questions coming. Thank you.
Thanks, Alistair. Hello, and thanks to the Academy for inviting us along today to talk about Argyle Street. Last week we presented the Merchant City that won the Great Neighbourhood Award many years ago, and it's a great example of a thriving place. Today we're going to reflect on Argyle Street in the neighbourhood of Finnieston. There are many parallels between the areas in their compact nature and evolution. So if you have the opportunity, please check out that presentation as well. Next slide, please. In case you're not familiar with the city of Glasgow, to give you some context, we are located in West Central Scotland. Argyle Street is 2 miles long and the longest street that runs from west to east through the city centre. Today we are discussing the western part, a 10-minute walk north of the River Clyde. Next slide, please. We're going to give you a respective overview of the street since the Academy's commendation in 2018. Then we have reflected on the place and given a review of where we are now 2 years on. Then a bit about the resiliency and our thoughts on its evolution of the urban condition. Here is our video presentation for resilience of our intermittent broadband connection. We hope you enjoy it. Scheme. This part of Argyle Street in Finnieston is a fine example of a compact walkable neighbourhood. It has a diverse mix of uses spanning from Kelvin Grove Art Galleries and Museum to the Charles Rennie statue sited at the Anderson Regeneration Scheme, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Finnieston is now voted one of the hippest places to live in the UK. Urban pioneers inhabit the street with an eclectic mix of independent shops, galleries, and some of the city's finest restaurants and bars, creating a vibrant street scene at its centre between these two bookends. This part of the street is within the West End Innovation Quarter, part of a £113 million investment programme with projects including the Kelvin Grove Museum refurbishment, and within the local neighbourhood, BBC Scotland, the Clyde Art Bridge, the SEC Hydro, and SWG3. 10 years of investment has created growth and revitalisation in the area. The proximity of the street, together with flexible spaces at reasonable rents, has encouraged colonisation by local creative entrepreneurs, allowing a vibrant nighttime economy to grow without being too dominant, with restrictions on too many licensed premises. The enthusiasm from business was contagious, and it demonstrated clearly how bottom-up regeneration can thrive when creative industries grow organically. The Glasgow Guarantee helps modern apprentices for local residents. The Scotch Bonnet Recording Studio and the Music Hub has benefited from this, for example. Business Gateway is a public-funded business who support organisations which also contributes to the area. The University and the International Finance Service District offer large-scale employment opportunities, with Sky Park and the Hidden Lane offering incubator space for startups and entrepreneurs. While council policies at the bookends have created world-class places for people, the stretch between demonstrates governance of the opposite type, light touch in policy terms allowing entrepreneurs to create attractive urban qualities from organic growth. The two planning regimes illustrate both extremes of current urbanism. Finnieston's creativity has been mobilised through low rents, providing a catalyst for unique boutique industries. Smart people make smart cities, and small incremental changes have made a big difference here. This approach to urban evolution is celebrated in Kelvin Campbell's new book, Making Massive Small Change. The city development plan and the placemaking principle is well demonstrated here, with positive qualities realised through a place-based approach to enhancing amenity. The legacy of the 2014 Commonwealth Games is shown in the bowling greens and the tennis courts. The Kelvin Hall Sports Arena is light, bright and welcoming, and Kelvin Grove Park is a healthy green resource adjacent to this well-used street. The combination of free gallery admission, eclectic exhibits and local park events has created a vibrant green social hub. Argyle Street, originally a drover's road to bring cattle in from the Highlands and Islands, crosses the River Kelvin then drops towards the city centre, lined with 4-storey residential tenements clad in blonde and red sandstone. The Glasgow tenement creates a distinctive 4-storey edge and strong proportion to the street, with natural surveillance provided by residential users above the shops. The neighbourhood has eluded gentrification that often characterises post-industrial redevelopment of inner cities. Changes have enhanced and preserved the ethnic, social and age mix. New student housing has created a vibrant university quarter, helped reduce HMOs and improve the quality of the housing stock. York Hill and Kelvin Grove Community Council are very active and manage social issues and reinforce community cohesion. The community is rich in ethnic and cultural diversity, as shown by the nearby Central Gurdwara, the Batur Rahman Mosque and the Buddhist Centre. Kelvin Grove Park hosts the popular annual Glasgow Mela Festival. The local cultural vitality spills out into the street, with the mix of food offers also being extremely diverse. Since the Academy visited Argyle Street in 2018, the new urban quarter at Glasgow University is a recent regeneration project, when completed amounting to £1 billion worth investment that will enhance the area where Argyle Street terminates. The master plan has been guided by the creation of a brief, building zones, master plan principles, design guidance and parameters plan, whilst responding to each building patron's brief. The design development responds to the context created by neighbouring buildings, public realm and landscaping by clarifying approaches in microclimate composition and building edges. The general gravitas of the spec modern research facility is focused on research branding, campus globalisation and research-led teaching, with an increasingly important role in modern society as a source of new knowledge and innovation, and diversity of functions, notwithstanding its direct economic role in the role of the information city. Beyond finessing the architectural response to the scale, depth and articulation of the facade, there is an inherent beauty in the grandeur, civic order and gravitas held by the immediate townscape. The Gilbert Scott Building, Kelvin Grove Art Gallery, Kelvin Hall Sports Centre and the surrounding historic context of the site that has been afforded to the city, that the emergent architecture does not seek to emulate but to respect and enhance. The core values of the new emerging architecture is a world-class, sustainable and contemporary campus, highly technology-driven, with a deep-rooted sense of place that is articulated duly in the internal and external building narrative. In addition to the work embedded in the new campus to provide sustainable urban drainage, water gardens, green roofs, environmentally engineered facades, photovoltaic and a district heat and power facility, research is underway across the park to establish a wastewater heat recovery project at Kelvin Grove Museum, just a stone's throw away from a statue of Lord Kelvin, who devised the theory of heat pumps in 1852.
Anderson Phases 4 and 5 is a large new housing development for sanctuary housing, where the client successfully invested in the idea of a car-free development. The new buildings open Argyle Street back up and reconnect Anderston's residents back into the surrounding area of Finniston, which is usually buzzing with activity as a result of the influx of bars and restaurants. The development comprises 206 flats, 119 for mid-market rent and 87 for social rent. High-quality public realm with play areas is interspersed by a sculpture of Macintosh by Andy Scott and the return of the much-loved and recently refurbished Anderson concrete hippos, a legacy from the previous 1960s development. The large amount of publicly accessible, open, car-free space has been a real boon during the COVID pandemic, with plenty of space for residents to continue their lives and instill a sense of community outside of their flats. The refocus of the space between the buildings towards people rather than cars has come into its own during these difficult times and should serve as a positive example of how we reframe the way we design our cities.
The hip strip restaurants pulled together delivery services that supported the local community and beyond with fresh, healthy meals that could be heated up at home, with some using any profits channelled into food for the most vulnerable. Now we are easing restrictions, restaurants are operating at reduced capacity, and car parks are being transformed into beer gardens and markets. One restaurateur has drawn up plans for a large external glass gazebo the length of the hip strip in the hope to adapt to restrictions imposed by the pandemic. Tackling COVID-19, we have all had to be flexible and adapt, and that has included our National Health Service. The Scottish Events Campus was transformed to the NHS Louisa Jordan Hospital in the early stages of the pandemic, with initial capacity to treat 300 patients. Thankfully, it has not been required to treat COVID-19 patients so far. However, it remains a vital asset in our phased approach to resuming NHS services safely where we can. Under Scottish Government's Housing and Social Justice Directorate, Scottish Government and local authorities have agreed to adopt the PLACE principle to encourage better collaboration and community involvement and improve the impact of energy, resources and investment. It promotes a shared understanding of place and the need to take a more collaborative approach to achieve better outcomes. This approach is embedded in our City Development Plan, together with the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Sustainability and placemaking are our core policy requirements, taking centre stage and leading development with a focus on the spirit of place, analysis of local contexts, and setting benchmarks for quality solutions. Reflecting on the place tool under the lens of the COVID pandemic has highlighted certain urban factors are more significant in lockdown than others. We have reflected on how lockdown restrictions affected certain aspects of our human rights, perhaps through sensitive urbanisation, creating nurturing future places for people, we can make neighbourhoods more resilient to future shocks. Pierceback, Argyle Street has the basic ingredients that are needed to support health and well-being and place resilience. It is agile, it acts local, and it has easy access to green space and outdoor recreation. The Argyle Street public realm has not been beautified, yet the streetscape has generous proportions that are flexible and adaptable, which improve capability to serve their communities in a greener and more agile way in the future, in coming months and years. So thanks to the Academy for the opportunity to take pause and reflect on the urban characteristics of then and now. It's been a very thought-provoking exercise and useful to record the snapshot in time. A quick shout out to Nick for his contribution. It's very much appreciated and great to celebrate such an exemplary piece of urban design within the city. Now I'm off the hook. I'm looking forward to hearing the other presentations.
Great, thank you so much, Emma. So that was a fantastic presentation. I think one of the things I'm keen to explore when we get around to the questions is that idea of whether change is coming bottom up or top down. Absolutely, when I went on the visit in 2018, you could see all the change happening, and I was fascinated by the idea that the planners were having a light touch when people were exploring change of use. And I think the other thing that Emma showed, which is good, that idea of massive small, and it fits in with the theme of today, where as we're going down in scale, but the issues we're tackling are always big issues. Now, I'm not sure I've been to an Academy of Urbanism presentation when people have talked about concrete hippos before, so that's all good. So keep those questions coming. Now we're going over to Cork. I'm sure a lot of people on this call remember the fantastic congress that we had there, and I visited Oliver Plunket Street in 2015. So I'm handing over to two people. Tony Duggan is actually the city architect since 2009 in Cork. He's been a great supporter of the Academy of Urbanism. And then Cathal O'Boyle is the executive architect of Cork Council, and he's in charge of the development plan. And he's currently reading for an MSc in Urban Design at Strathclyde University. So I'm handing over to you two, and thanks very much.
Well, good afternoon, fellow urbanists and guests. It is my pleasure to welcome you to a review and update of Oliver Plunket Street, the winner of the 2016 award. This is a double act. I'm Tony Duggan, presenting the history of the street and the background of the winning entry of 2016. And my colleague, Cathal Baille, will give you an update from 2016 to the present. First of all, we'll just talk about the criteria, which I'll talk about the history, and then there's the various assessment criteria, which I'll deal with in the next slide. Now, the first of all is our location. Cork City is located in the southwest of Ireland and on the edge of Europe. Better still, in the 18th century, we were world centre stage, the last trading post for provisions between Britain and America and the West Indies. The most important point of this is that the reason for Cork's rapid growth in the 18th century. Next, the old walled medieval city was centred on the north and south main street. After the siege of Cork in 1690, the walls were demolished and the city expanded eastwards, and by 1720 there was a long thoroughfare extending half a kilometre named Argyle Street. And this became the main trading street of Cork City, with side streets at regular intervals leading to river channels. As shown on Roke's map of 1773, the whole island has been developed through the extensive trade between Britain and America and Ireland. Following the example of Antwerp in the late 18th century, Cork City filled in its channels. The centre of commerce then moved to the large premises on St. Patrick's Street and the Grand Parade, and Cork Argyle Street lost its main street status. However, throughout the 19th century, the street remained resilient and continued to thrive. The name was changed to Oliver Plunket Street in the 1920s. Part pedestrianisation was started in the 1980s and fully installed with a major redevelopment designed by the Catalan architect Ben Hamilto for the European Capital of Culture in 2005. Back to the 18th century and the view of Cork City with its river channels, gabled front buildings and front buildings, and it resembles practically a Dutch city. This brings us to Oliver Plunket Street's local character. Cork is a trading city with emphasis on the street, with public spaces being the channels. The street itself is the longest in the city, culminating with an access on Cork's Harbour Commissioner's Building of 1810. The nearest to a meeting place is at the junction of Winthrop Street, Oliver Plunket Street, opposite the main post office. The street, although long, is very intimate in scale, and this is due to the regular punctuation of side streets. And now this brings us to amenities. It is a street where you can trade, shop, visit, dine, and live. There is an eclectic mix of upmarket shops, high-end furniture, jewellers, fashion and boutiques, and at the middle end you have hardware and electronics. At the bottom end then there's there's discount stores, a family grocer and a Turkish barber. Consequently, it caters for all types and ages, from affluent and less advantaged to the young and the old. The physical amenity value is further enhanced by the public realm and the use of quality materials, and the level surface across the entire street, a pedestrian-friendly atmosphere with restrictions to traffic. Dealing with commercial and the commercial success and viability is the personal touch of these small independent traders, lasting over 200 years, that is endured the trading custom of not alone Corkonians and visitors alike, which in turn complements to the larger international brands of Patrick Streets nearby. There is a significant number of bars, restaurants, and on the street and side streets, which creates vitality in the evening as well as during the day. The street is a great example of environmental sustainability area, mainly due to the minimization of traffic and cars. The street is pedestrianised during the day, and there is an abundant public transport nearby with connections to suburbs and the region. This leads us to connectivity. The street layout with its many connections, side streets, to Oliver Plunket, with the side streets to Oliver Plunket Street, facilitates good connectivity to the wider city region, and by choice of good transport modes. The street is within easy walking distance to the rest of the city and the adjoining historic residential areas. Community and health well-being of Oliver Plunket Street is characterised by people working together for the benefit of the street, both as individuals and as an organisation. The strength of well-being is augmented by the presence of a significant residential population. An example of community spirit is that the street pastors of Oliver Plunket Street, which is a voluntary organisation that distributes food at night to those in need and provides support to anybody on the street. Now, I have described, one could say, the criterion assessment in urban design terms. However, how is the street well managed? Where is the leadership start and governance begin? Well, I can tell you that it is a fine balance. In layman's terms, I could say, how does the street tick, gel? And how do we make it better? Now, there were the thoughts of two ladies, Valerie, a hairdresser, and Claudia, an optician, and they were discussing the same topic over a cup of coffee. So, in order to progress these issues with other traders, they formed the Plunket Street quarter, and it is really at grassroots level. They had a vision for the street, that you were entering someplace special. The Plunket Street quarter, with its strong physical presence, with its own heritage, is always associated with words like vitality, energy, well, like welcoming a friend and a community hub, full of activity and ever-changing landscape of events and great shopping that make it a go-to destination. It was from this culture that the initiative was held to provide a 500-metre long table on the street with dining al fresco served by the street's chefs. Now, going back to leadership and governance at a more macro level, the street benefits from such organisations as the Cork Business Associate Organisation and the Cork Chamber of Commerce. The formal governance is entrusted to the City Council policy, which is developed by the democratic process of elected members of the council. These policies are implemented by council officials at various departments, such as traffic management, planning, and even housing. At a middle level of governance, the establishment of the city centre partnership, the appointment of a city centre coordinator, which has close involvement with senior management of the city council, altogether improve the effectiveness of the council services and communicate, thus enable areas such as Oliver Plunket Street to continue to realise their potential. And with that, I'll hand over to Cathal, and he'll talk about new interventions and extensions.
So the city has not stood still since 2016. In fact, we've been very busy with Oliver Plunket Street and its development. The street has effectively extended to the west into the medieval city and straight on through to the south branch of the Lee. There's a lot of work there tying us back into Oliver Plunket Street. And to the east, we have moved towards the Port of Cork, including the introduction of a new University College Cork school on the Quays, which is in the refurbished Cork Savings Bank on the right-hand side of this image. We have the Maldron Hotel, which is just off Oliver Plunket Street, which has got, it's a 4-star hotel with 163 bedrooms, which opened in 2019, and which gives an awful lot more visitor accommodation to the centre of the city and to Oliver Plunket Street. On the other side of the street then, there was a building belonging to the ESB, the Electricity Service Board, which was in bad nick and had been abandoned, and we worked with local artists to produce something that's much more lively, and with a little bit of street lighting brought this street, Caroline Street, back into the public realm and lifted the spirit of it, and that has been a catalyst for the involvement of local artists in the public realm, and we have developed a series of murals around the city, I think 7, which are ongoing and which are bringing art into the city centre. Across the road from that building then is 115 Oliver Plunket Street, which even in 2016 when we won the award wasn't in good nick. It was derelict, but thanks to the refurbishment of it and the inclusion of €3 million on that building, we've established a new cafe, enlivening the public realm even more, and above it a venue for 500 people. Should we ever be allowed to come out of our houses again, we could go there and listen to some music. Farther up the street, and then we have Princess Street, which led the push during the COVID crisis for pedestrianisation to utilise more outdoor space. This street was the catalyst for 17 pedestrianisation projects which have happened in the city on a temporary basis and which are being converted now into permanent pedestrianised streets. In fact, all of the streets off Oliver Plunket Street now are to be pedestrianised. Several of them already were, but this is extending it further in response to the demand for more outdoor space. As you can see from this image, there's not a great deal of open green space in the centre of Cork. So as we extend to the west, you can see Bishop Lucy Park, which is being refurbished along the side of Tuckey Street, which is another pedestrianised street. Bishop Lucy Park was subject to a Royal Institute of the Architects of Ireland design competition, which was won by Hall McKnight, a Belfast architectural firm, who are currently developing their designs up to public consultation and planning stage before the end of the year. And then across farther into the medieval city, across South Main Street, we get to Counting House Square and student accommodation. Counting House Square is not yet finished, but as you can see in that image, they're putting on the final touches to this new public open space in the city centre, next to a planned fence centre and just across the lane from more high density urban living student accommodation to support University College Cork's campus in the city centre. As Tony mentioned, this street is made up of over 100 individual companies and businesses, and the fine grained nature of it is what gives the street vitality. And John Minahan, who owns the pharmacy, said the street captures the pulse of the people, and I am proud that my family have been part of that for the past 60 years. This is an image not from this year, because there's not enough of the right type of mask. But from a couple of years ago, every year we have a jazz festival on the Halloween bank holiday weekend, and there's a parade down Oliver Plunket Street, which brings everyone out onto the street to watch and to listen to the music. So Oliver Plunket Street has been for the last 300 years the heart of Cork City and continues to be that to today. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll hand you back to the chair.
Great. Thank you, Tony and Cathal. That was fantastic. it's again another example of local activism. When I went in 2013, we met the two ladies who had the first idea, and the fact that they made that happen is a great thing. In fact, one of us said, you know, what about calling it a business improvement district? How about formalising it? And they all said, but we're all friends. All of us that own the shops, we all know each other. We all talk. What do we need? Some formal arrangement, which I think was a great way of looking at it. And the questions are coming through are great. There's themes coming through, which is good. I'm not going to get into the questions now, but there's one that's too good a link to actually not bring up. But Nicholas Fawkes has said about Glasgow, how do you tame the cars? And that's, thank you very much, Nicholas. That's a perfect intro to where we're going now. So we're going to Park Street in Poynton. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the two people presenting. So it's Howard Murray, who was a former councillor there. He was the one that had the idea and drove it all forwards. And he actually, in his bio, he says, I've got no formal qualifications in highways or town planning, but he hasn't let that hold him back at all. So that's great. And then the other person who's going to be presenting is Harv Barlow, who's the clerk to Poynton Council. And she's trained as a lawyer, so she's used to dealing with difficult questions. So keep those questions coming. I'm handing over now to Howard and Harv.
Is this working?
We can see the screen, probably just need it full screen. Perfect.
Okay. One of the reasons Harv it's great to have Harv around. She reminded me that there are certain things I shouldn't say, which let me emphasize the thing it says at the bottom there. Anything I say today, if you don't like it, come back to me. It's no good going back to a council complaint system. I'm a free man. Poynton, if you don't know where it is, well, I should say, first of all, that I want to dedicate this to Ben Hamilto Baille, without whose genius and quiet resolve, this really wouldn't have happened. I regard him as being the Monty Don of the public realm. Poynton, no links to the slave trade whatsoever from this little place, and having heard those two fantastic presentations, I just wonder what we're doing in the same room, really. Poynton in 1960 had 3,500 people. It was a former coal mining village. Its main significance is on the main London road, the last bit of flat road before the Peak District. You have to go over the Peak District to find another north-south road that's as flat. To the left of this road is the Cheshire Plain. This is Park Lane, the main shopping thoroughfare of Poynton, as it was. This is an offset junction. It had traffic light control, and 26,000 vehicles went through that junction in every 12-hour period in 2008. I draw your attention to a car park up here. It's called the Civic Centre car park. That looks like a busy day in 2008. Normally you could see tumbleweed running through it. This is what Poynton used to look like. You can see from the left-hand picture, there's somebody there on one of those mobility scooters with his Zimmer frame attached to the back like some form of a lifeboat. Because once people got stuck on the little bit of pavement strip that's there, they virtually had no chance of getting off. They were like Daleks. There really was restricted movement. And the thing about Poynton is, although we're south of Manchester, and I've not got a big map to show you where Manchester is because I guess everybody knows, one of the defining characteristics of it is that we have the highest number of people over the age of 60 in the whole of Cheshire. I think Cheshire is certainly, but the whole of Cheshire as well. You give them super fast broadband and you've got some workload. On the right-hand screen, you can see again a picture of what it used to look like. Old houses, miners' houses converted into shops. But the traffic lights are the thing I want to draw your attention to. Those traffic lights, even those are pelican crossings there's some traffic lights further on in the distance. They licensed car drivers to do 35 mile an hour unless there was a police officer in uniform stood there. What that effectively did was increase our road traffic collision rates enormously. We had deaths and life-changing injuries. But also it divided the one street that we had. As ugly as it is, or was, it was the traffic with their pollution and their speed that divided both sides. And survey after survey about Poynton said, you've got to do something about Park Lane. Well, we tried everything, and that's when we got in touch with Ben, and he was our saviour, although I did think it was all a bit wacky to start with. But this scene here was one of the things that helped convince me. It's the same bit of Park Lane back in the bad old days, taken from one from west and one from east. And it's interesting, there's people crossing the road or trying to cross the road at this point. Now, at this point, traffic hasn't quite gone higher than 20 mile an hour leaving the traffic lights, or it's slowing down to below 20 mile an hour. And what that meant is that drivers recognise people crossing the road. Thus, it proved that if you can engineer a space to below, so it works for drivers, it brings the speed down to 20 mile an hour or less, then people will cross the road, and therefore people will stay in the space. Therefore, people will spend money. So this was Ben's initial concept, and his genius was not to confine us to Park Lane alone. He said, you've got to tackle that junction, otherwise I'm wasting my time and you're wasting your money. Incidentally, the total cost of this scheme, including £1 million that in my opinion was wasted, was just the cost of a building in Cork. I think we did all this for £3 million. The things to point out here is the design was very much a building line on one side, a building line to the other. You can see desire lines indicating where we thought people would want to cross, because Ben had this theory that everybody was Pythagoreans, everybody wanted to work on angles. So after a fairly major consultation exercise involving a 3-day exhibition and writing to every home and loads of other stuff, we ended up getting a more detailed engineering diagram. And this came, I think, from Planet, a fabulous company based in Altrincham, and I recommend them highly because, again, they were on our side. They weren't one of the Goliaths that we had to slay, along with a company called Stockley's and a chap called Stephen O'Malley. So it was Lindsay Humblett from Planet and Stephen O'Malley. And again, they, along with Ben, gave me a sense of we can do this. And in fact, I was like the lion with no heart. They breathed the heart into me. The public, there's a quote by Machiavelli that says that the innovator has everybody for enemies. And boy, did we have enemies, because this was a bottom-up, a genuine bottom-up idea. And now, how we pulled it off would take too long to go into. But for enemies, we had other councillors who didn't want money spending on Poynton. Poynton was just a breadbasket to take rates from. We had senior council officers who didn't want to do stuff in Poynton because they wanted to spend money on their pet projects. Highways engineers who never couldn't conceive doing anything like this and were scared of it. We had the press against us, the local knocking newspaper, print media. We even had the BBC and the One Show saying this is lunacy and madness and you should all be locked up. And we got the Golden Cone Award for traffic jams during the build phase. And then we had the public. Now, some members of the public got it, but I'd have to say 66% didn't. And it doesn't matter even to this day, whatever objective fact you give to some people, cognitive dissonance means that they just don't buy it. You ask them what you need to provide by way of evidence to prove that this scheme works, and you can give them none. And they'll tell you there's no evidence that you can give me that makes me feel comfortable in that space. And that's the key to it, actually. You have to make the car driver feel comfortable to make the pedestrian feel comfortable. But this was a scheme of society. The public told us they wanted us to respect the local heritage. So here you have 4 gateway features, so 4 entrances to this. On the left, extreme left, you have a chain going over a chain wheel representing the link to historic link to industrial Manchester. The propeller, the historical link across to British Aerospace at Woodford, a mile away, where they built Lancasters and Vulcans and all kinds of other stuff. A rope going over a mine wheel, which shows the link to Poynton's 90-odd pits, and a stylized wheat sheaf showing the link to Cheshire's fertile plain. And the public told us that those are the kind of things they wanted, and we gave them. The public also, through the thing called the Disability Advisory Group, which was one of the first things we set up, people with disabilities told us they didn't want shared surface. They wanted shared space. So there is an upstand to that curb. The curb is in a contrasting colour with tactile material. The lozenges you can see at the edge there are to help people with visual impairment cross the road. And the dimples, well, they were retrofitted at the request of the Macclesfield Eye Society. And then, because we listened, the Stockport Eye Society came along and said, you need 2 rows of dimples. So we gave them 2 rows of dimples. We gave them everything they asked for except traffic lights, which is probably why Lord Holmes didn't come to Poynton or quote Poynton in any his submissions as to why he didn't like shared space. This couple were also part of the Disability Advisory Group, but I don't know when this photograph was taken, and I can tell you it wasn't staged. The one thing I want to point out here is the lights across the road you can see towards the church spire. They at night shone down a zebra crossing pattern across the road, and that really did help people with visual impairment, because lights is the one thing that they can see unless they have blackout blindness. And 97% of the people with visual impairment or who are registered blind have usable sight. And they said, give us bright lights. So we gave them bright lights. Unfortunately, the public hated them. They thought they were like scaffolds or motorway gantries and said, take them down, get rid of them. They're awful. And if you don't, we'll string you up on them. I always say these were the 2 pictures that sold the scheme to most people. Everybody could identify with the top picture. That's how Poynton was. They recognised it. It looks dowdy, looks tired, it looks every day. There's nothing to commend Poynton. The one thing we couldn't call this would be hip. The picture below is actually an artist's impression, although it's a pretty good picture. And this promised blue skies, white fluffy clouds, green trees, and actually better looking people. And I think that's one of the things that Poynton has actually rode in behind. So I'm just about to hand over to Harv, but before I do, look at the lamppost on the right-hand side of the picture. Notice the scaffolding crossbeam has been taken off there and a different type of lighting head is fitted, and the disability visual display bands are around the lampposts. So I'm going to hand over to Harv, because Harv came to Poynton in 2016 as the clerk. She doesn't live in Poynton, so she's as near to an unbiased observer as we could drum up at short notice. Over to you, Harv.
Thank you. So yes, as Howard said, I've been here since 2016, so I'm going to paint the picture of what Poynton is like now. And of course, it will be impossible at the moment not to mention the impact coronavirus has had on both our communities and our places. Lockdown has inevitably affected many of the businesses on Park Lane, and some of them have had to close for a second time in a year. But when businesses were allowed to open, shared space came into its own. The characteristics of the wide pavements helped with social distancing, but it also allowed businesses to more easily expand their outdoor space in the summer. So, for example, one eatery, the Snap Tin, which is our local pie shop, a very northern thing, has recently applied and was granted planning permission for a permanent canopy, which now allows dining all year round. Needless to say that despite the cold last week before the second lockdown, the area was full of diners making the most of their kind of last bit of freedom. So since the scheme's completion, Park Lane and the rest of Poynton has continued to thrive. I can attest that tumbleweed is no longer in the car park. Finding a car parking space can be very tricky, especially at lunchtime. And that's, you know, the curse of a successful town. As well as its cafe culture, Poynton has continued to attract new businesses and has a good mix of retail offerings. Vacancy rates on Park Lane are currently at just over 4%, compared to a rate of around 10% for Cheshire East. Park Lane has attracted large national retailers, but has managed to avoid becoming a clone town with a wide variety of independent shops. So you'll see here we've got Waitrose and we've got Costa Coffee, but we can also boast an art gallery, butchers, clothes shops, which would be the envy of larger towns. We've got a really lovely mix of businesses, both nighttime and daytime, within the town itself. Residents and businesses clearly view the area as a significant asset for the town. Annually, we hold the town's Christmas Fest, which is a large celebration just before Christmas, albeit, unfortunately, it won't be happening this year, but it just gives you an indication of the kinds of uses that we have for the space. Maintenance, however, remains the responsibility of Cheshire East as the highway authority. The council has worked really hard to try and ensure that the shared space surfaces, which are so important to the scheme, don't deteriorate. The town council has set up a working group to continue to lobby Cheshire East to repair and reinstate the area to the original standards, not to put tarmac in or temporary repairs. Howard mentioned David and Goliath earlier, and that's certainly a metaphor that continues to ring true in our ongoing battles, if you like, with Cheshire East. Poynton, because of the shared space scheme, is a vibrant place to live, work, shop and socialise. It is and was a scheme of society, and I hope that you might come and visit us very soon. Howard.
Okay, thank you for that. Just to sum up then, it's quite remarkable, I think, when I look at other schemes when I think back to before we started this, and I just said we've got to do something about Park Lane. Had I realised then what we were taking on, I wouldn't have actually taken it on. This was groundbreaking in its own way from a council where nobody gets paid apart from the clerk. So we had a clerk working on this part-time, and that was it. And we did drive it bottom up. The management of this was a nightmare until the second phase of it, where we actually got a grip on the Cheshire East highways officers, so that when we agreed on something, as I, chairing the steering committee, got something agreed, then they didn't go and change it, which is what they were apt to do. Sometimes they use the heading value engineering to create problems of maintenance that Harv is talking about now. So just to finish then, this for Poynton was massive, and it's significant because it was bottom up and because of the size of the council. And I say in closing, I would like to go back to the genius that helped promote it, Ben. He was alive when that picture was taken. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Howard and Harv. Fantastic presentation. It's been great watching the chat, the questions coming in. I think what I've got from that presentation and the time I've spent with both of you is this idea of bottom-up activism. Unpaid councillors making things happen, and I think that's really struck a chord with all our audience. In fact, Tim Challen, one of his questions, you probably haven't had a chance to look at the questions yet, is saying, is it published? Is there a manual you can give us? Can you help us through similar things? So let's just park that thought for a while you think of that. In terms of the first question, there's been lots of themes going through. I was going to pass over to Pam Alexander she had a question about shared spaces, which I think is very, very relevant and actually picks up on other ones. So are you there, Pam? Are you able to unmute yourself and ask that question?
I was trying to remember what on earth the question was. It was ages ago. 3 fantastic presentations. Thank you so much. I've just loved this series, and today was as good as any. And such contrast, really, between a Glasgow main street, the wonderful Oliver Plunket Street, and the fantastic work done almost entirely voluntarily in Poynton. Really, really interesting. And Poynton reminded me of some of the work we did at Ashford, where people could not believe that a shared space would work on what was a ring road. So I hope that Argyle Street takes heart. It is possible to provide a degree of pedestrianisation at certain times, even for a really busy road. And I suppose my question was how you dealt with those 66% of people who were opposed in Poynton, and what the challenges still are in Argyle Street, and what the challenges were that were overcome in Oliver Plunket Street to get everyone agreed to the sort of pedestrianisation we're all valuing now so much, when we're very happy to eat outside, however cold it is. We just, whoever it was that said there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing, surely is absolutely right for the times of the moment. I obviously have an interest because digital engagement is the way that we've brought people on side some low traffic neighbourhoods in London, and really interested to hear what your challenges were and how best you overcame them. Thanks.
Great, thanks. So probably we'll just do that in reverse order. Howard and Harvey, if you answer first, and then Cork, and then Argyle Street, that would be great.
Okay, can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Okay. I don't think we have convinced everybody, so we haven't got everybody on board. Harv was telling me just this morning about somebody who was giving out about shared space in Poynton. A third of the population divided roughly into 3 segments, and I'm not too sure about the proportions in each, but one segment got it. They got it straight away and could understand it and comprehend it, and that was great. The second section, the second third, if you like, I'm going to call it a third, we worked on, and they can see now with their own eyes that it works. They can see what it's done for Poynton. They know house prices have gone up. They know shop vacancies are down. We know the place has been revitalised. It's not this wasn't a traffic scheme. This was to revitalise the 3rd worst performing retail centre in the whole of Cheshire. So they can get that, and there is a group of people who just will not countenance it. As I said, it doesn't matter what statistic you give them. You can give them pollution statistics. Pollution has been improved. Vibrations have been improved. Travel time. We know travel time has been improved because the buses had to reschedule. We know that the road traffic collision rates are down massively, and they know it is because they've not heard anything in the local misery papers. The Macclesfield Press or the Manchester Evening News have not been able to run a story that's through a Freedom of Information request, telling the drama story that they want to tell. It just isn't there. And some people will still say, oh, I hate it. And yet house prices continue to rise and people continue to want to come and live here. So I'm not too sure where you go with that. I can tell you the techniques that we used, from the exhibition to sending a letter to every home, to having a drop-in at the works office on phase 2, where people could go at any time and go and talk to one of the engineers, to getting their email addresses and firing facts at them. Where social media let us down is that idiots can get onto social media and write all kinds of trash. They can say the councillors have went to Holland on a junket, paid by the local residents. Not true, wrong. We paid all our own way, and I've still got the tickets to prove it, because I know there's people out there who are so stupid that they do not want to accept it, and that you just have to live with it. And I think that's part of I think a New Zealand farewell is something like, be brave. And wherever you are in the world of public service, there are times you just have to be brave. It can be daunting when you're getting calls at 3 o'clock in the morning and you go and answer the phone and somebody says, are you Howard Murray? I said, yeah. thinking, my son who's in the Air Force, there's something happened. What's going on? He says, are you awake now? Yeah. Well, good. So am I. As long as I know you're awake, worrying, and then they put the phone down, and that happens for 3 months. Not all members of the public were convinced.
So how there's a great answer. I'm going to keep the idea of be brave in there, and then go over to Cork to get their answer about that valuing of shared spaces.
I suppose I'll start first. I suppose it's a slow process. It's not something that will actually come quickly. Pedestrianisation occurred initially in the 1980s, and it wasn't really welcomed that much. But as time went on, people realised that in Oliver Plunket Street that it had value, and then it was permanently installed in the sense that it's there from about maybe 2000. There was for capital of culture. The street got a complete makeover, and pedestrianisation would be there from say 11 until 6 o'clock, and then you have deliveries after that. But from the point of view of the side streets, it was bottom up as regards Princess Street. The traders in Princess Street are mainly restaurateurs, and they wanted an additional extra space, and actually came up with the idea themselves. So from years working in both in Dublin and Cork and in Wexford, I find that it has to be bottom up. You know, you have to get people enthused from that are there, and if that happens, it's quite easy. But it's a slow process.
And further to that,
so
I would
Cathal
say
might
that
come in there, yeah.
Once you've started, I would say that the Princess Street desire was accelerated by a jealousy of looking across to the other pedestrian street on the other side of Oliver Plunket Street to say, how come they can be out on the street? How come they help people, serving people on the street, and we can't? And so that got a groundswell, got an enthusiasm for those people to come talking to us in the city council to increase the amount of pedestrianisation. And I think it's a bit like a snowball in that it grows in momentum. Great.
I was going to pass that same question over to Emma, and before I do that, Emma, just to thank you, you're actually answering questions as we go, which is brilliant. So if Poynton and Cork feel happy to answer some of the questions as we're going along.
Where are they?
On the chat box at the bottom.
I think from our point of view, Cork on a light on environmental injustice and green inequalities in the city, and there is a need change in some communities to mobilise sustainable and equitable solutions. Across the Central Belt, there's been more populous areas have seen higher rates of the spread of the virus. And our current city centre policy advocates repopulating the city centre and providing family accommodation. So I think at the moment, Merchant City and Finaliston are located, not far from green space. I think post-pandemic, we're going to have to look at our streets, our public realm and spaces to think about how we create more green spaces, more places where people can occupy to protect their health and well-being. City Deal at the moment, they've got a programme, the Avenues programme, and we have seen a design some of our major streets like Sauchiehall Street, and there is plans to redesign the lower part of Argyle Street towards the city centre. And they are looking at purposing the street to provide more pedestrianisation and things like suds and rainwater gardens. So the hope is that and the pressure of COVID will then, push that programme to be worked into the Finaliston area as well.
Great, thanks for that. I was going to move on to another question now. I know that Craig Kinner has actually been asking a couple of questions, and he's gathering together a theme that's coming across about multi-generational. Today was great to hear about Glasgow, all those young hipsters, and then Howard positioning himself at the other end, at the other extreme of that, with the in the middle. So, Craig, are you there? Are you able to unmute yourself to?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Hi. Yeah, it was. I think it's probably common to anywhere really, all the streets that we've seen. Which, thank you very much for all the presenters. It's fantastic to see the work going on, and the kind of the improvements that have been made to both kind of the streetscape and the kind of the adjacent shopping and for the citizens of the area. Yeah, it's how we can ensure that all kind of generations of us are encouraged to interact in those spaces, and particularly the youngest and the oldest of us that maybe feel like they're not as welcome as the hipsters, as it were.
So I'm going to go the other way around this time, since hipsters is coming up a lot. Emma, you were the one saying it was the hippest place to live. So if we begin with you and go that way round to answer Craig's point.
Yeah, I mean, I think Finnieston is multi-generational. I think that it's hit for all ages. We're not ageist in Finnieston at all. And I think that there's a plethora of activities that support different ethnic groups as well as different age groups.
Great. And then I'm just going to say Cork. So between Tony and Cathal, you can decide which one of you is answering.
I'll go first, I suppose. It's interesting if you look at, I think traditionally Oliver Plunket Street was always a street where you had a whole variety of different activities. And if you look at it presently, you'll find, from an ethnic point of view, you'll find an Italian cafe, you'll find a Moroccan barber, you'll find a Turkish barber, you'll find people that are starting up something, and you'll find elderly people there. So it has a tradition where people where there was a kind of a mix, you know. So I'd say the very fact that the small grain of each of the premises actually helped that, you know, more so than if you had large premises. Cathal might help me again, but I think that would be the gist of it, I'd say, Cathal.
I'd just second that and say that the fine grain means that it gets to serve everybody. So you can have a bookshop for someone who's been there who wants to read a book, who might be more elderly, and you might get a disco, you might get a venue upstairs somewhere else that might be for someone younger. I suppose we are also concentrating on trying to increase the amount of residents in the city, which brings a more life to it on a 24-hour basis. So it's not just about the age spread, but also the time spread. We'd like to be used all day, and the increase in student accommodation and the increase of residents in the town helps that to spread all day.
In the current census, there's actually a larger proportion of non-Irish people living in the inner city of Cork. So that's an indication of how hip or how interesting the place is to live, you know.
Great, and then Howard.
I'm not too sure what to say, really.
Unlike you, Howard.
We've let people from Wales come and live in Poynton. It's clearly everybody in the village uses it. I'd pick up on one of the questions I just managed to scan there about we played a bit with a car park theme, saying the car park was empty, the car park is full, and trying to use that as an analogy for success. And I accept that it's not, because at the time this car park was empty, 70% of the household spend was going out of Poynton. We know that's changed. But we also know there's more people on the streets now than ever before. I think there was one set of bike racks in Poynton before the scheme, and now there's about 9. And there are people down there on their bikes. There are more people on those mobility scooters or mobility scooters. And there's just generally more people out, and people don't feel the need to get in the car and drive to an out-of-town shopping area. It clearly works for older people. The pavements are easier to navigate. There's more, you get that. There's more variety, so the working population can come and do their hip things. And then for young people, I didn't realize how much it worked for young people until they started to say really positive things about it. And the police actually said antisocial behaviour has dropped. It was a place where gangs of youths would gather, and there was generally trouble on Park Lane. It's gone, partly because of good lighting, partly because there's more people around there, and partly because we've created one of the largest skate parks in Europe.
Brilliant. I'm really warming to this idea from Tim Challen that there must be a way of publishing all those lessons. The Academy of Urbanism is very much about lessons learned, and for all 3 streets, I'm keen to sort of capture this revisiting. So Tim, I was actually going to ask you to unmute. You were asking a question I think about COVID. I've managed to avoid the COVID question until now, but we're on the home run. We have to talk about it. And I think, Tim, you had an interesting question about how the streets are used and what the future is. I'm hoping you're there, Tim.
I am here.
Perfect.
I don't know if I'm visible.
You are?
You are.
I'd just like to tell Poynton they should be, after all this is over, all this COVID stuff, whatever it is, they'll be expecting a visit from Ashbourne to see how. My question, it's only an hour away. My question is kind of broader than COVID actually, but what I'm noticing in high streets, where I live locally and anywhere else, is as retail units shut, we're getting more and more coffee shops, bars, cafes, barbers, and a whole range of other services, which clearly aren't the ones which you can purchase over the internet. So the internet is having, internet shopping is having an impact on our shopping centres. Do we think in the long term this is sustainable? I mean, just being cynical, how much coffee can people drink? How many haircuts do people need? Shouldn't we be searching for other solutions to our old retail centres, our established retail centres, other than bars, restaurants, and personal services? And I'm not anybody who's got any problem with bars and restaurants, but they are also there for those people who can afford them, and they're not necessarily for those for everybody within a town or within the city or a neighbourhood.
Great question. Let's begin with Emma again.
I think it's a great question. I think that during the pandemic, I think that it has been a struggle with small proprietors closing down, and to be honest, I'm not quite sure the resiliency of some of the proprietors going forward. So I think that there will have to be, smart creatives thinking about how we continue occupation of the finer grain shops that we're talking about. To be honest, I don't think I have an answer. I just know that, Finnieston has been so lively because of the creative entrepreneurs and their contribution towards the area and their ingenuity. And I hope that continues within the future. But I think the fact that small boutique industries, I think that gives the place resilience.
Thank you. Walk.
I would just say that Tony and I were actually talking about this just earlier on today about why the street seems to be so resilient, and I think the fine grained nature of it is as Emma just pointed out, is imperative to it, because if you have a large retail element and it closes, it kills, I don't know, 100 meters of a street, whereas a small fine grained development will allow the individual units to open again and reinvent themselves. I don't think we need to be worried too much from a planning or from an urban perspective about what the individual uses are. I mean, the reason that they're now coffee shops and hairdressers and I can't remember what the third thing it was, bars. The reason that's because that's what the demand is there for. And I'd say that as time moves on, evolution will move on, and there'll be a demand for other things. I think that the failure of what we would know as traditional retail is only a failure of a particular type of retail that has been there recently. I mean, it's been a long time since we had a rope maker or a chandlery in Oliver Plunket Street, and yet the shops that would have been those are still there and work as shops because they respond to the needs of the people on the street.
Thank you.
Hi, I think Kyle's just said it all. It's market demand. Planning will only take you so far in trying to control. There's only so many laws in planning that can control what shop, what business is on the high street. And back in 2008, we knew that we were shifting away from butchers, bakers and candlestick makers. The high street, the public realm, is about what you cannot do on the internet. And one of the key things you can't do on the internet really is socialise. Why people are feeling the way they are at the moment is they can't actually get together. And what a street like Poynton does is create a space where people will come to and they will dwell. If they dwell there, they will spend money there. It's as sure as night will follow day. Now, what they spend the money on, well, that's a modern day conundrum. You know, you're lucky to find a cobblers. We have a cobblers in Poynton, but you're lucky to find one of them on the high street. An art gallery on the high street, well, that's a new use for it, but it's the kind of thing that people want to see and touch. If you're buying a bag of rusty nails, you can do that. You know, Screwfix will have it to be in a heartbeat. But you can't go and have a cup of coffee with your friends. You can't go and get your nails done on the internet. So let's not, you know, I wouldn't knock the service industry or the service provision. We've actually got a major retailer there, Waitrose. It didn't kill anything apart from a fruit and veg shop, which quite frankly should have been killed off sometime sooner. That granularity comes through market forces, but it's having people there with money in the pockets. Cork, you're a tourist destination as well. I'm sure Glasgow is. It just would never occur to me. But you've got to get people into the space with money in the pockets to be able to spend and sustain. What they want to spend it on is up to them. I mean, who would have thought we needed a tattoo parlour? But apparently we do.
We have one of those too.
No, that's actually a great way of leading on to the next question, which is from Steve B, talking about money as well. Before he goes on, Pam's reminded me, this is the moment I should be doing an advert. When I was saying we should be learning from these places, Wednesday the 25th between 3 and 5 p.m. is when we gather together all 5 of these great places revisited. And so put that in your diary now. I'm sure Stephen and Olga will be doing an advert at the end, but it's absolutely the learning that we've got from these sessions and the other 4 is going to be talked about more Wednesday the 25th between 3 and 5 p.m. So I'm hoping that's given Steve B a chance to get ready to answer that, ask that question that just came up in the chat about new business models.
Well, thank you. I don't know that it's given me time to think about it. It's just that I'm aware that certainly in the high street where I live in Winchester, it's rather larger than Poynton and smaller than Glasgow and Cork, that there has historically been a lot of institutional investment in property in the high street built on anticipated retail growth in the past. That is changing significantly, and I think that's a structural change that we and those investment institutions are going to have to get used to. And I just wondered whether there are new models of ownership and tenure of commercial properties in town centres, maybe that might involve local authorities more in the future, that might provide a more sustainable basis for these smaller, more personal service businesses.
Thanks, Steve. I'm going to not break the format now. We're going to go Glasgow, Cork, Poynton again. So if you're happy to answer that point, Emma.
Yeah, no problem. We have been open to changes in use from shops to food and drink and other creative uses. And we already kind of promote low rents to support the businesses. So we've taken an approach that we're promoting quality and resilience opposed to a rigid approach to policy. A good example of this is the Hidden Lane, where Joe Mulholland has purchased and renovated all small industrial type buildings in the lane for the last 20 years. He originally bought 3 derelict properties in 1990, realising that there was a market for smaller, quick units and attracted artists and other enterprises. And as other properties came on the market, he snapped them up. And now, you know, the Hidden Lane has got tea rooms, galleries, a Turner Prize winning artist. And then you've got the other end of the scale where Andrew Fleming Brown has got SWG3, which is a multidisciplinary arts venue, and that was a reuse of the old Clydeside galvanisers. So I think it's bottom up, mainly within this area. It's creative entrepreneurs creating places for other entrepreneurs and low rents that's actually created a kind of healthy and vibrant economy within the area.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's it uses that you wouldn't actually think of, you know, that particularly regarding sport, that people actually have actually taken, sport has training in various aspects as regards health. They're items that actually occurred on the street, these type of premises that we wouldn't have thought of. The other item would be small boutique further down the street, a warehouse that was derelict for a while. There's a planning application for a boutique hostel hotel. So there's all sorts of issues. I think the main thing, I think Cathal said before, is that if we look back at going back into the 18th century, you'll find if you named all the various types of uses, definitely you'll find that over the years, you know, there's a trend. And a street is something, particularly if movement along a street. I think movement is one of the major things that you'll find that the uses are going to change. And it's really commercial forces are there. You know, I wouldn't underestimate the ingenuity. I think you can't really plan for things. You know, you have to just adapt. And the small nature grain of the units, I think, is the key to it.
Mm. And just a brief note to add to that is that I would get a little nervous about Cork City Council or any council deciding that they know best about how what methods of delivery there should be for businesses, and that's why we work so closely with the local businesses to hear what they say and to try and work in cooperation with them to deliver what they tell us is required in the area.
Thank you. Back to you, Howard.
I've almost forgotten what the question was, but I'll press on anyway. There's a chap who's asked a question called Nicholas Falk. I don't know him. He's not paying me any money, but he makes 2 points. One is he says about treating the street like a theatre, and he's bang on. He's bang on. Don't treat it like a street. Treat it like public realm. When you realise you've got building line to play with, even though we had to go into privately owned property, we said, it's not going to cost you anything, we'll do it. You can still own the property rights to it, but let us just use it. That Ben's concept, building line to building line, you create the theatre. Now what comes, who these travelling players are, they come and they go, somebody gets made redundant, they come and open a card shop, it folds after a year, somebody else comes along. That's the normal turnover in streets. You lose your rope makers and tallow fat extractors. One of the other things he said was the shops that stay add value, and he's bang on there. We have a hardware shop. We actually have B&Q one way, Wicks in another way. Screwfix is running a trench up to my front door every week. But we still have a hardware shop because they add value. And there's other shops that add value as well, where you can go in and touch and feel stuff. And the staff are nice to you. They know your name. They welcome you. You can get advice from them. How do you do this? How do you do the other? The stuff you don't get by buying commodity on the internet. So high streets are going to be about theatre. They're about the things that people want that they can't get on the internet. And they are, if they can get it on the internet, the differentiator is added value. And that added value is how they treat you. You know, it's like that pub, Cheers, where they know everybody's name. When they know your name when you're coming in and they can tell you how to do something you can't find somewhere else, are just examples of how you change the relationship on the high street. And then the high street becomes something else. It doesn't close at 6 o'clock. Something else happens at 6 o'clock. That's it. I'm done.
Good. Okay. Well, I think we're almost done. We've got 6 minutes to go. There's a great question that's come up from, if I'm pronouncing it right, on Bretta Romis. If you wanted to just, if you're able to unmute.
Right. Yes. Well, this is not a question. I was actually really agreeing with a lot of what has been said. I mentioned here the example of the high streets and the benefit on elder people. And for me, the lesson of this is that it really shows that high street work when they provide a range. So the person before me, Howard, talked about how high street is public realm. And has theaters. So I think we have to think really long term if we want to talk about resilience. So long term, and the question of cooperation in the management. So I really like the idea of fine grain of buildings, because they allow for an evolution of needs to be catered for and adjusted. And I think it's very important that the management comes from a collaboration of a lot of actors, some of them that can think long term, such as local authorities, and others can think in more immediate terms. So the reason why the research on the elderly really rang a bell with me is because whilst you take initiatives that can have very strong, positive, immediate impact on their life, if we think in terms of resilience, they will have an impact which is incredibly large in financial terms, for example, in healthcare provision. It gives older people independence. It allows them to socialize by providing very simple spaces that only places like local high streets can afford. So for me, local high streets have got an incredible, important role in the health of our city centers. And in the quality of life of every group. It's just a matter of really truly understanding what the needs of these local groups are and how they interact with each other. Part of the study that I was mentioning also looks at how compatible, for example, needs of elderly people are with needs of younger people. And the overlap is very large, it's not very small, which is something really interesting. So I think the three examples that we've seen today, they all really show very good example of how some of these can be implemented and can be started, but also I think from the discussion and I think it was Tim's question that really generated this idea of compatible uses of how else we can add to these really interesting experiences. So yes, not exactly a question, but really, I really, as an urban designer, I really appreciated the call for thinking of high streets as real public realm, because not very often actually this is done.
Alistair, so I think it might be interesting to just for people to know that Poynton has been awarded dementia-friendly status. So we are classed as a dementia-friendly town. And part of that is around our shared space, but a lot of it is around speaking to retailers and getting them to make sure that their businesses are dementia friendly. So Howard mentioned that we have the kind of biggest population of over 60s in Cheshire East. Dementia is a real issue for people in this town. And that's one of the steps that the Town Council has made to try and help and promote better health and well-being.
Great. I think we're going to have to leave it at that point, unless Cork or Glasgow have got a burning point to make, because time's literally running out.
Thank you. No.
Remember, I'm going to do that advert again for the 25th. We're all going to meet again with all the other people. You know, the great cities, the great neighbourhoods, great towns. We're all going to meet again to carry on that conversation. And personally, I'm going to make sure I get a copy of all those questions that came through on the chat. So I think this is the start of a bigger debate. You know, the fact that that Tim was saying he already wants to arrange a visit to Poynton, the overlap that Cathal just said about Umbretta being at the University of Strathclyde. There's so many connections lurking within our conversations, but it is my duty to finish at 2:30. So it's been a fantastic thing. I want to do it all over again. In fact, we are on the 25th. So I have to be slightly more truncated. There's obviously thanks to the people doing the presentation. As I predicted at the start, lots of diversity of places and lots of diversity of ways of working, but actually so many themes that work through that. So we're going to run out of time to thank everyone. The person to thank obviously is Olga at the Academy of Urbanism, that's made all this happen. And thank you to all the audience. And it's going to be available on to watch the recording as well, to pick out all those other questions you can ask on the 25th. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.